My name is Noah, and I'm 24 years old. I grew up on a sprawling organic farm in the heart of Vermont, where the air smells like fresh earth and the sunsets paint the fields gold. That farm wasn't just land, it was my home, my history, my everything. My parents built it from nothing, pouring their hearts into every seed, every harvest. They taught me and my older brother, Caleb, how to tend the soil, how to nurture life from it. But to me, it was more than just crops and dirt. It was a promise, a legacy. I dreamed of modernizing it, turning it into a beacon of sustainable farming, a place where the community could gather, learn, and thrive. I'd lie awake at night sketching plans for solar panels, drip irrigation systems, and a farm-to-table co-op. I thought Caleb shared that dream. I was wrong. The farm had been in our family for 3 generations. My great-grandfather started it with a single acre, a plow, and a stubborn belief that hard work could feed a family. By the time my parents took over, it had grown to 200 acres of rolling fields, orchards, and a small herd of dairy cows. We grew everything organically: tomatoes that burst with flavor, crisp lettuce, sweet corn that didn't need butter. My mom used to say the land had a heartbeat, and if you listen close enough, you could hear it. I felt that heartbeat every time I walked the fields, my boots sinking into the soil, my hands brushing against the leaves. It was where I belonged. Caleb, though, was different. He's 3 years older than me, and where I saw roots, he saw chains. He'd always been restless, itching to leave. As kids, we'd work side by side, me happily weeding rows of carrots, him grumbling about the heat or the bugs. He'd roll his eyes when I talked about soil health or crop rotation, calling it hippie nonsense. I thought it was just a phase, that he'd come around. After all, he was the eldest. The farm would be his one day, and I figured he'd learn to love it like I did. But Caleb had other plans he never shared with me. Our parents passed away when I was 18, just out of high school. A car accident took them both. Sudden and cruel. The grief was like a weight I couldn't shake, but the farm gave me purpose. I threw myself into it, learning every detail of its operations, from bookkeeping to pest management. Caleb, on the other hand, drifted. He moved to the city, got a job in finance, and only came back for holidays. When he did, he'd barely set foot in the fields. He'd sit on the porch, scrolling through his phone, muttering about better opportunities. I didn't think much of it then. I was too busy keeping the farm alive, honoring our parents' memory. When the will was read, it wasn't a surprise that Caleb inherited the farm. He was the eldest, and that's how things worked in our family. I got a small trust fund to cover college, which I used to study sustainable agriculture instead. I figured I'd run the farm under Caleb's ownership. We'd be partners like our parents were. I'd handle the day-to-day, and he'd handle, well, whatever he wanted, as long as the farm stayed ours. I trusted him. He was my brother. But trust is a fragile thing. About a year ago, I started noticing things that didn't add up. The farm's bank account was lower than it should have been. Equipment repairs I'd budgeted for weren't getting done. Caleb was vague when I asked him about it, saying he was handling things. Then one morning last spring, I woke up to the sound of heavy machinery. I stepped outside and saw bulldozers at the edge of our property, tearing into the orchard where I'd picked apples as a kid. My stomach dropped. I ran to the site shouting at the workers, but they just handed me a business card for some developer named Horizon Properties. I called Caleb, my hands shaking, but he didn't pick up. That's when I knew something was terribly wrong. I drove to the county records office that same day, my heart pounding like it was trying to break free. I spent hours digging through paperwork, my eyes scanning for anything that could explain what was happening. And there it was, buried in a stack of contracts, a deed of sale, signed by Caleb, transferring 150 acres of our farm to Horizon Properties for a multi-million-dollar housing development. The date on the contract was 6 months earlier. 6 months! He'd been planning this behind my back, selling off our legacy like it was just another asset to flip. I sat in my truck outside the records office, staring at the papers until my vision blurred. The farm wasn't just land, it was my childhood, my parents' dream, my future. And Caleb had sold it without a word. I felt like I'd been gutted. The sadness was heavy, like a stone in my chest, but it was quickly swallowed by rage. How could he do this? How could he betray me, our parents, everything we'd built? I wanted to scream, to drive to his fancy city apartment and demand answers. But I didn't. I just sat there, clutching the steering wheel, trying to figure out what to do next. That night, I went back to the farmhouse and walked the fields in the dark. The moonlight cast long shadows over the rows of kale and zucchini I'd planted. I could still hear the hum of the bulldozers in the distance, a reminder that part of the farm was already gone. I thought about my mom's words, about the land's heartbeat. It was still there, faint but steady. I wasn't going to let it stop, not without a fight. The next morning, I started making calls. I reached out to neighbors, local farmers, anyone who might care about what was happening. I learned that Horizon Properties had a reputation for steamrolling small communities, turning farmland into soulless subdivisions. But I also learned something else. The sale wasn't fully finalized. There was a clause in the contract about environmental permits, and the developer hadn't cleared all the hurdles yet. It was a small window, but it was something. I could still save part of the farm, if I acted fast. I organized a meeting at the community center, expecting maybe a dozen people to show up. Instead, over 50 came. Farmers, shop owners, families who'd bought our produce for years. I stood at the front, my voice shaking at first, and told them everything. How Caleb had sold the land, how the developer planned to pave over our fields, and how I wanted to fight back. I expected pity, maybe skepticism. But what I got was fire. People were angry, not just for me, but for what the farm meant to them. It was their market, their gathering place, their connection to the land. By the end of the night, we had a plan. We'd challenge the permits, rally public support, and make it as hard as possible for Horizon to move forward. That was the moment I realized I wasn't alone. The farm wasn't just my family's. It belonged to the community too. And I was going to fight for it, not just for me, but for everyone who believed in it. Caleb might have thought he could sell our roots for a quick buck, but I was going to show him what those roots were worth. I didn't know how yet, but I knew I'd find a way to reclaim what was mine, what was ours. I woke up the morning after the community meeting with a fire in my chest. The sadness and rage from Caleb's betrayal still simmered, but now there was something else. Purpose. I wasn't just fighting for the farm anymore. I was fighting for everyone who'd shown up at the community center, for the kids who'd grown up picking strawberries in our fields, for the neighbors who'd swapped recipes using our kale. The farm was more than my family's legacy. It was the heart of this town, and I wasn't about to let Horizon Properties rip it out. The first step was understanding the enemy. Horizon wasn't just some small-time developer. They were a juggernaut, known for turning rural land into cookie-cutter subdivisions with names like Meadowview Estates that had no meadows left to view. I spent hours at the library poring over their past projects. They'd bulldozed orchards in Oregon, wetlands in Maine, even a family vineyard in California. Their playbook was clear. Buy cheap, charm or pressure locals into compliance, and ignore any pushback until it fizzled out. But I wasn't gonna fizzle. Not this time. I started with the environmental permits. The contract Caleb signed had a clause requiring Horizon to prove their development wouldn't harm local water sources or wildlife. It was a weak spot, and I intended to exploit it. I reached out to Sarah, a friend from college who'd studied environmental science and now worked for a local conservation group. Over coffee at the diner, I spilled everything. My brother's betrayal, the bulldozers, the community meeting. Her eyes lit up with that same fire I felt. "Noah," she said, "if we can prove the farm's land is critical to the local ecosystem, we can stall them, maybe even stop them."
Sarah and I got to work. We mapped out the farm's wetlands, which fed into a creek that supplied half the town's drinking water. We documented the red-tailed hawks nesting in the old oak grove, the rare wildflowers growing along the fence line. I spent days trudging through the fields with a notebook, photographing every detail, while Sarah compiled data on soil composition and water flow. It was grueling, but every muddy boot print felt like a step towards saving the farm. We submitted our findings to the county's environmental board, requesting a full review of Horizon's permits. It wasn't a guarantee, but it bought us time. Meanwhile, the community was rallying. Mrs. Henderson, who ran the local bakery, started a petition to protect the farm, collecting signatures at every market and church event. By the end of the week, we had over 500 names. Jake, a retired lawyer who'd bought our tomatoes for years, offered to look over the sale contract for loopholes. He found a big one. Caleb hadn't disclosed the sale to me, a partial stakeholder through our parents' trust. It wasn't enough to void the deal outright, but it gave us leverage to demand a public hearing. The hearing was set for a month later, and I threw myself into preparing. I organized more community meetings, each one bigger than the last. People brought ideas, fundraisers, protests, even a letter-writing campaign to the state's agricultural board. I started a social media page called Save Our Farm, posting photos of the fields, stories about my parents, and updates on our fight. The page exploded with shares from people as far away as Burlington. Strangers commented about their own memories of family farms, about losing their own land to developers. It hit me hard. This wasn't just my fight anymore. It was bigger than me. But not everyone was on board. Some folks in town saw Horizon's development as progress. They said jobs, tax revenue. A few even accused me of being selfish, clinging to some old dirt when the town needed growth. It stung, especially when I heard it from people I'd known my whole life. One night at a town council meeting, a guy named Tom, who owned the hardware store, stood up and said, "Noah, you're young. You don't get it. This deal could put our kids through college." I wanted to yell, to tell him the farm was worth more than money, but I held it together. I explained how the farm supported local businesses, how it drew tourists, how it kept our town's soul alive. Some nodded, but others just crossed their arms. I realized then that this wasn't just a fight against Horizon. It was a fight to win hearts. The hardest part, though, was Caleb. I hadn't spoken to him since I found the contract. Part of me wanted to drive to his city apartment and scream in his face, but another part couldn't bear to hear his excuses. He'd called a few times, leaving voicemails I deleted without listening. Then one evening, he showed up at the farmhouse. I was in the kitchen sorting through soil samples when I heard his car pull up. My stomach twisted. I didn't want to see him, but I couldn't avoid it. He looked out of place in his polished shoes and button-down shirt, like he belonged in a boardroom, not our creaky old house. "Noah," he started, his voice soft, "we need to talk." I didn't look at him. I just kept sorting samples, my hands trembling. "You sold the farm, Caleb," I said, my voice low but sharp. "What's there to talk about?" He sighed, like I was the one being unreasonable. "You don't understand, Noah. The farm was bleeding money. Dad's debts, the taxes, it was going to drag us under. I got us out. You should be thanking me." I laughed, bitter and cold. "Thanking you? For selling our home? Our parents' dream?" He flinched but didn't back down. "You're naive, Noah. You think you can save the world with your organic kale? This is the real world. Horizon's offer was a lifeline." I turned to face him then, my fists clenched. "A lifeline for you, maybe. What about me? What about the town? You didn't even ask me, Caleb. You just decided." His eyes darted away, and for a second I saw something like guilt. But then he straightened up, his voice hardening. "I did what I had to do. You'll see, it was the right call." He left without another word, and I stood there, shaking, the door slamming behind him. The anger was so raw, it felt like it could burn the house down. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying his words, the way he'd called me naive, like my dreams were childish. But I also thought about the community, the petition, the hawks in the oak grove. Caleb might have given up on the farm, but I hadn't. I was done letting his betrayal define me. I started thinking beyond just saving the land. What if I could build something new, something that honored the farm's roots but looked to the future? The idea of a sustainable food business, one that could outlast Horizon's plans, started to take shape. It was risky, maybe even crazy, but it felt right. The next day, I met with Sarah and a few others from the community meeting. We brainstormed over coffee and donuts, sketching out a plan for a co-op. We'd grow organic produce, sell directly to locals, and reinvest the profits into protecting more land. It wasn't just about saving the farm anymore. It was about creating something Horizon couldn't touch. We scouted a nearby plot, 20 acres that hadn't been sold, owned by a neighbor willing to lease it cheap. It wasn't the whole farm, but it was a start. And as the hearing approached, the pressure mounted. Horizon sent a slick lawyer to town holding meetings to address concerns. He promised jobs, parks, even a community garden, as if a few raised beds could replace our fields. Some people bought it, but others didn't. The Save Our Farm page kept growing, and we planned a rally outside the hearing. I was nervous, but I was ready. Caleb might have thought he'd won, but I was just getting started. The fight was about to get louder, and I was going to make sure everyone heard it.
The morning of the public hearing felt like the air before a storm. Heavy, electric, ready to break. I barely slept the night before, my mind racing with everything that could go wrong. The county courthouse was a small brick building in the center of town, usually quiet except for the occasional traffic ticket dispute. Today, though, it was packed. Cars lined the street and a crowd spilled onto the lawn, holding signs that read, "Save Our Farm" and "Stop Horizon." My heart pounded as I walked through, nodding to familiar faces, Mrs. Henderson with her petition clipboard, Jake with his legal notes, Sarah with a stack of environmental reports. This was it, the moment we'd been building toward. The moment I'd either save what was left of the farm or lose it for good. Inside, the hearing room was stifling, the air sick with tension. The county board sat at a long table, looking uncomfortable in their stiff suits. Horizon's lawyer, a guy named Richard Vance with a polished smile and an expensive watch, stood at a podium, flipping through papers like he owned the place. Caleb was there too, in the front row, avoiding my eyes. Seeing him made my chest tighten. A mix of sadness and fury I couldn't shake. He'd sold our legacy, and now he was here to watch it crumble. I took a seat near the back, clutching my notes, trying to steady my breathing. The hearing started with Vance laying out Horizon's plan. 300 houses, a strip mall, a community-focused park that sounded like an afterthought. He threw around words like progress and economic growth, promising jobs and tax revenue. Some people in the crowd nodded, but others whispered angrily. When he mentioned the farm, he called it underutilized land, and I felt my nails dig into my palms. Underutilized? I'd spent my life tending that soil, coaxing life from it. It was more alive than his sterile blueprints could ever be. Then it was our turn. Sarah went first, presenting our environmental findings. She was calm but firm, explaining how the farm's wetlands fed the town's water supply, how the oak grove was a habitat for protected species. She showed slides of the wildflowers, the creek, the hawks soaring above the fields. The board listened, scribbling notes, but I could tell they were skeptical. Vance countered smoothly, claiming Horizon had mitigation plans and that the development would include green spaces. I wanted to scream that his green spaces weren't the same as our fields, but I held it together. We had to play their game. Next, Jake stood up, his voice steady despite his age. He pointed out the loophole in the contract, Caleb's failure to disclose the sale to me, a stakeholder through our parents' trust. He argued that this breached fiduciary duty and warranted a review of the sale's validity. The board's chair, a stern woman named Miss Larson, raised an eyebrow but didn't comment. Vance dismissed it as a technicality, but I saw Caleb shift uncomfortably in his seat. For the first time, I wondered if he was starting to realize he'd underestimated me. When it was my turn to speak,
My legs felt like jelly. I walked to the podium, gripping my notes so hard they crinkled. I looked out at the crowd, farmers, neighbors, people I'd known my whole life, and took a deep breath. "My name is Noah," I started, my voice shaking at first. "This farm isn't just land to me. It's my home. It's where my parents taught me to plant seeds, to respect the earth. It's where this community comes together, where we share food, stories, and hope. Horizon wants to pave it over for houses nobody here can afford, for a mall we don't need. My brother," I paused, glancing at Caleb, who still wouldn't meet my eyes. "My brother sold it without telling me, without telling any of us. But this farm isn't just his to sell. It belongs to all of us." I told them about the petition, the 500 signatures and counting. I talked about the Save Our Farm page, how people across the state are watching. I shared my vision, not just to save the farm, but to build something new, a co-op that could sustain the community for generations. My voice grew steadier as I spoke, the words pouring out like they'd been waiting my whole life to be said. When I finished, the room was silent for a moment, then erupted in applause. Even Miss Larson cracked a small smile. But the victory was short-lived. Vance stood up again, his smile tighter now. He presented a new document, one I hadn't seen, a revised permit application that addressed some of Sarah's environmental concerns. It wasn't perfect, he admitted, but it was good enough to move forward. He also dropped a bombshell. Caleb had signed an amendment to the contract, waiving my stakeholder rights in exchange for a bigger payout. My stomach dropped. I looked at Caleb, and this time he met my eyes, just for a second, long enough for me to see the guilt before he looked away. The betrayal cut deeper than ever. He hadn't just sold the farm, he'd erased me from it. The board deliberated for what felt like hours, though it was only 20 minutes. Miss Larson finally spoke, her voice clipped. They'd grant a temporary injunction to pause Horizon's construction pending a full environmental review and a legal investigation into the contract's validity. It was a win, but a fragile one. Horizon had the money and the lawyers to drag this out for years. I knew we'd only bought time, not the farm. Outside, the crowd was buzzing. People hugged me, thanked me, promised to keep fighting. Sarah squeezed my arm and said, "We did it, Noah. We're still in this." But I couldn't shake the image of Caleb's face, the guilt in his eyes. As the crowd dispersed, he approached me, his hands in his pockets. "Noah," he started, but I cut him off. "Don't," I said, my voice cooled. "You made your choice." He stood there, silent, as I walked away. The anger was still there, but now it was mixed with a hollow ache. He was my brother, but he felt like a stranger. That night, I sat in the farmhouse, staring at the old photos on the wall. My parents in the fields, me and Caleb as kids, grinning with dirt on our faces. I wanted to hate him, but part of me still remembered the brother who'd helped me build forts in the barn, who'd carried me home when I sprained my ankle. Where had that Caleb gone? I didn't know, but I couldn't dwell on it. The fight wasn't over, and I had a plan to keep moving forward. The next day, I met with Sarah and the others at the 20-acre plot we'd leased. It was small, nothing like the sprawling farm I'd grown up on, but it was ours. We started planting carrots, lettuce, beans, using the sustainable methods I'd studied in college. We set up a roadside stand, and word spread fast. Locals showed up not just to buy, but to volunteer, to share stories, to be part of something. The Save Our Farm page became a hub for the co-op, with people posting recipes and photos of their meals. It wasn't the same as the old farm, but it was a start, a seed. Horizon wasn't done, though. A week after the hearing, I got a letter from their legal team threatening to sue if I continued interfering with their project. Vance even called, his voice dripping with fake sympathy, offering to buy out the leased plot for a generous sum. I hung up on him. They thought they could scare me, buy me off like they'd bought Caleb. They were wrong. Every carrot I planted, every customer I served was a middle finger to Horizon and to my brother's betrayal. I was building something they couldn't touch, a legacy rooted in the soil, in the community, in the heartbeat of the land. The hearing had been the peak, the moment everything hung in the balance. We'd won a battle, but the war was far from over. I knew Horizon would come back harder, and Caleb's silence was a wound that wouldn't heal. But as I looked out at the new plot, at the people working alongside me, I felt something new. Hope. I was reclaiming my roots, one seed at a time, and no one, not Horizon, not Caleb, could take that from me.
The weeks after the hearing were a blur of dirt, sweat, and determination. The temporary injunction had bought us time, but it felt like holding back a flood with a bucket. Horizon Properties wasn't backing down, and neither was I. The 20-acre plot we'd leased became my lifeline, a patch of earth where I could rebuild what Caleb had tried to destroy. Every morning I was out there before dawn, planting, weeding, watering, my hands calloused and my heart raw. The community was with me, neighbors, volunteers, even kids who'd show up to help after school. But the weight of the fight was heavy, and the shadow of Caleb's betrayal loomed larger than ever. The co-op was taking shape faster than I'd expected. We called it Roots Reclaimed, a name that felt like a promise to myself and the town. The roadside stand was a hit. People drove from neighboring counties to buy our tomatoes, zucchini, and herbs. Sarah set up a website, and we started taking online orders, delivering baskets of produce to local restaurants. Mrs. Henderson baked pies with our apples and sold them at her bakery, donating half the profits to our legal fund. The Save Our Farm page kept growing, with thousands of followers now, some sending donations, others sharing our story. It was humbling, but it also meant pressure. People were counting on me, and I couldn't let them down. Still, Horizon was a constant threat. Their lawyer, Vance, kept sending letters, each one more aggressive than the last. They claimed our campaign was defamatory, that we were scaring off their investors. One letter even hinted at suing me personally for lost revenue. Jake, our retired lawyer friend, laughed it off, saying it was just intimidation. But it still kept me up at night. I wasn't just fighting for the farm anymore. I was fighting for my future, my reputation, everything I'd built. And Caleb, he was a ghost. No calls, no texts, just silence. Part of me was relieved, but another part ached for the brother I'd lost, not just to the city, but to greed. The environmental review was our biggest hope, and Sarah was relentless. She'd found evidence that the farm's creek was a spawning ground for a rare fish species, which could force stricter regulations on Horizon's development. We submitted the data to the county, but the board was dragging its feet, probably under pressure from Horizon's deep pockets. Meanwhile, their bulldozers sat idle at the edge of the old farm, a daily reminder of what was at stake. I'd walk past them sometimes, staring at the churned-up earth where our orchard used to be, and feel a pang so sharp it was like losing my parents all over again. But the co-op gave me purpose. We expanded the leased plot, adding a small greenhouse for year-round growing. Volunteers built picnic tables, and we started hosting community dinners, serving dishes made from our crops. Those nights were magic. Families laughing, kids running through the fields, music playing from someone's old guitar. It was what I'd always dreamed the farm could be, a place that brought people together. One evening, a woman named Clara, who'd bought our lettuce for years, pulled me aside. She said, "Noah," her eyes misty, "this feels like home." I swallowed hard, nodding because it felt like home to me too. The legal fight was another story. Jake filed a motion to challenge the contract's amendment, the one where Caleb had waived my stakeholder rights. We argued it was signed under duress, that Caleb hadn't fully disclosed the terms to me or the community. The judge agreed to hear our case, but it was scheduled months out, and Horizon was already lobbying to speed up their permits. I started to feel the strain, running the co-op, organizing rallies, keeping up with legal paperwork. I was 24, not some seasoned activist, and there were days I felt like I was drowning. Then came a curveball. One morning, I got a call from a reporter at a regional newspaper. She'd seen our social media page and wanted to write a feature on the fight. I was hesitant. Publicity could backfire, make us look like troublemakers. But Sarah convinced me it was a chance to sway public opinion.
The reporter, Emily, spent a day at the co-op, interviewing me, Sarah, and the volunteers. She walked the fields, took photos of the greenhouse, even helped harvest carrots. The article came out a week later, front page, with a headline that hit me like a punch: "Young Farmer Fights to Save Family Legacy from Corporate Greed." It told my story: my parents, Caleb's betrayal, the community's stand. It mentioned Roots Reclaimed, calling it a beacon of hope in a town under siege. The article went viral. Our social media page doubled in followers overnight, and donations poured in, enough to cover legal fees and expand the co-op. Restaurants in Burlington started placing orders, and a local college invited me to speak at their sustainability fair. Suddenly, we weren't just a small-town fight. We were a movement. But with the spotlight came heat. Horizon issued a press release accusing us of misleading the public and obstructing progress. Vance showed up at the co-op one day, all smiles, offering to partner with us on a community garden within their development. I told him where he could shove his garden. He left, but not before warning me that things could get messy if I didn't play ball. The messiest moment came a week later. I was at the co-op, unloading a delivery of compost, when Caleb's car pulled up. My stomach twisted, but I kept working, pretending I hadn't seen him. He walked over, his city shoes sinking into the mud. "Noah," he said, his voice quieter than I'd ever heard it. "Can we talk?" I wanted to tell him to leave, to scream at him for what he'd done. But something in his eyes stopped me. Guilt, maybe, or something close to it. I nodded, and we sat at one of the picnic tables, the air heavy between us. "I didn't think it would go this far," he started, staring at his hands. I thought I was doing the right thing. The farm was a money pit, Noah. Dad's debts were piling up, and I couldn't keep it going. Horizon's offer, it was enough to clear everything, to start over. I clenched my jaw, trying to keep my anger in check. "Start over for who, Caleb? You? Because you left me with nothing. You left the town with nothing." He flinched, but he didn't argue. "I know I screwed up," he said. "I should have told you. I didn't think you'd understand." I laughed, sharp and bitter. "Understand? You sold our home, Caleb. You sold Mom and Dad's dream, and you didn't even give me a chance to fight for it." He looked away, his shoulder slumping. For the first time, I saw him not as my brother, but as someone lost, someone who'd traded his roots for a paycheck and was starting to realize it wasn't worth it. "He wants to help," he said finally. "I can't undo the sale, but I can talk to the lawyers, maybe get you more time." I stared at him, torn between hope and disbelief. Was he serious, or was this another trick? I didn't trust him, not after everything, but I also knew we needed every advantage we could get. "Fine," I said, my voice cold, "but this doesn't fix us. It doesn't fix what you did." He nodded like he had expected that, and left without another word. As I watched him drive away, I felt the anger ebb, replaced by a quiet resolve. Caleb's offer might help, but I wasn't counting on it. The co-op was thriving, the community was behind me, and the environmental review was still in play. Horizon could throw all the money and lawyers they wanted at us, but I was building something they couldn't buy, a legacy that grew from the soil, from the people, from the heartbeat of the land. The fight wasn't over, but I was ready for whatever came next. I'd lost the farm, but I was reclaiming my roots, and no one could take that away.
The months after Caleb's visit were a whirlwind, a mix of small victories and looming threats. The temporary injunction held, stalling Horizon's bulldozers, but their lawyers were relentless, filing motions to push the development forward. Meanwhile, Roots Reclaimed, our little co-op on the 20-acre leased plot, was growing faster than I could have dreamed. The community had turned it into a hub, not just for fresh produce, but for connection, for hope. Every basket of carrots we sold, every community dinner we hosted, felt like a defiance of Horizon's concrete empire and Caleb's betrayal. But the fight wasn't over, and I knew the final battle was coming. The environmental review was our ace in the hole.
Sarah's research on the rare fish in the creek paid off when the state's environmental agency flagged Horizon's permits for further scrutiny. The oak grove's hawks and the wildflowers along the fence line were enough to classify part of the original farm as a protected habitat. It wasn't the whole 150 acres Caleb had sold, but it was enough to save 50 acres, land that would stay untouched, forever zoned as agricultural. When the ruling came down, I was in the co-op's greenhouse, transplanting seedlings. Sarah burst in, waving the letter from the agency, her face lit up with a grin. "We did it, Noah," she shouted. I hugged her, dirt smudging her shirt, and for the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe. The legal battle over the contract was trickier. Jake's motion about Caleb's failure to disclose the sale to me, a stakeholder, went to court. Caleb kept his word, meeting with Horizon's lawyers to admit he'd rushed the amendment to cut me out. His testimony was a bombshell. It didn't void the sale entirely, but it forced Horizon to renegotiate terms. They agreed to relinquish 10 more acres to settle the dispute, meaning we'd saved 60 acres of the original farm. It wasn't everything, but it was enough to keep the heartbeat of the land alive. Horizon moved forward with their development on the remaining 90 acres, but their strip mall plans were scaled back, replaced with smaller homes and a park that, to their credit, included a real community garden. The victory was bittersweet. I'd walk the saved acres sometimes, tracing the paths where I'd played as a kid, and feel a pang for what was lost. The bulldozers were back, carving up the fields I'd loved, but the 60 acres we'd saved were thriving. We'd merged them with the leased plot, expanding Roots Reclaimed into a full-fledged co-op. We hired local farmers, set up a composting program, and even started a small farm school for kids. The co-op's roadside stand was now a permanent market, with a sign that read, "Roots Reclaimed, grown with love." Every time I saw it, I felt a surge of pride. This was my legacy, built from the ashes of Caleb's betrayal. The community dinners became a weekly tradition, drawing crowds from across Vermont. People brought dishes made from our produce, roasted beet salad, zucchini fritters, and apple pies that rivaled Mrs. Henderson's. Musicians played, kids chased fireflies, and I'd stand back, watching, feeling like my parents were there, in the laughter, in the soil under our feet. The Save Our Farm page had evolved into a platform for Roots Reclaimed, with followers from as far as California. We started shipping preserves and dried herbs, and a local brewery even made a beer with our hops, calling it Noah's Resilience. I laughed when I saw the label, but it meant something. I had turned pain into something real, something lasting. Caleb was the hardest part to resolve. After his testimony, he started showing up at the co-op, not saying much, just lingering at the edges. I ignored him first, my anger still too raw. But one evening, as we were cleaning up after a dinner, he stayed late, helping stack chairs. I found him outside, sitting on a bench, staring at the fields. "I'm sorry, Noah," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't know what you were taking from you." I wanted to yell, to tell him sorry wasn't enough. But I was tired of carrying the hurt, tired of hating him. "Why'd you do it, Caleb? Why didn't you trust me?" He looked down, his hands clasped tight. "I was scared," he admitted. "The debts, the taxes, it felt like the farm was drowning me. I thought selling it would set us free. I didn't see what it meant to you, to the town. I was wrong." It wasn't an excuse, but it was honest. For the first time, I saw the brother I'd known as a kid, the one who'd built forts with me, not the stranger who'd sold our home. "I can't forgive you yet," I told him, "but maybe someday." He nodded like he'd expected that and left quietly. It wasn't closure, not fully, but it was a start. Years passed and Roots Reclaimed grew into something bigger than I'd ever imagined. We bought back another 20 acres from a neighboring farmer, expanding our fields. The co-op became a model for sustainable agriculture, with articles written about us in national magazines. I spoke at conferences, sharing our story, not just the fight, but the rebuilding, the community that made it possible. Horizon's development went up, but it wasn't the soulless sprawl I'd feared. The community garden they built was small but thriving, and some of the new residents even volunteered at the co-op. It wasn't perfect, but it was proof that we'd changed the narrative. One spring, as I was planting tomatoes in the saved acres, Caleb showed up again. He'd quit his finance job and moved back to town, working at a local nonprofit. He looked different, less polished, more grounded. "I want to help," he said, holding a shovel. I hesitated, the old wounds still there, but I handed him a tray of seedlings. We worked side by side, not talking much, just planting. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was something. A seed, maybe, for a new kind of relationship. Looking back, the heartbreak of losing the farm never fully faded. It was a scar, a reminder of what Caleb took from me. But the anger had softened, replaced by the triumph of what I'd built. Roots Reclaimed wasn't just a co-op, it was a testament to what happens when you fight for what matters, when you lean on community, when you refuse to let betrayal define you. I'd lost part of the farm, but I'd reclaimed my roots in a way I never expected, through the soil, the people, the life we'd grown together. As I stood in the fields one evening, the sun setting over the 60 acres we'd saved, I felt the land's heartbeat again, strong and steady. My parents were in that rhythm, in the rustle of the leaves, in the laughter from the market. I'd honored their dream, not by clinging to the past, but by building a future. Caleb's betrayal had nearly broken me, but it had also shown me what I was capable of. I wasn't just Noah, the kid who'd lost his family farm. I was Noah the farmer who'd reclaimed his roots, who'd turned pain into purpose, who'd built a legacy that no one could ever take away.